Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go and get started. So thanks for your patience. Good evening, welcome. My name is Joyce Mulvaney. I am the communications manager here at the Reading Municipal Light Department. Thanks for joining us tonight for our virtual electric vehicle workshop. Next slide, please, Brian. So just a few housekeeping items before we get into the meat of the presentation. The session is being recorded. If you're attending via Zoom, you can submit questions into the Q&A that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take those at certain points in the presentation, so just be patient on that. Reading Community Television is also airing this live on one of their stations, so we're very appreciative to them for doing that for those who can't attend on Zoom. If you did register for the event in Eventbrite, then you will receive an email with a link to the recording probably towards the end of this week. And we'll also share a lot of the links and resources that we go over through the presentation. So just be on the lookout for that. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for this evening. I'm going to start off by talking about a little bit about the RMLD. I will go over electrification and some of our RMLD's programs in that area. My colleague Tom O'Lilla will go over a bit of plug-in electrical vehicle 101. And then we have a great owner panel for tonight, which I think will be kind of the highlight of the evening. We have 9 EV owners who are also RMLD customers, and they have very graciously volunteered to share their experiences with us tonight. So I think that will be a great part of the program. And then we'll wrap up with just some additional resources. Next slide, please. Okay, so first off, apologies if you were in the heat pump webinar that we did a month or so ago, because these first couple slides are the same. So there's some duplication. Just a little bit about RMLD. We are a not-for-profit, municipally owned electric distribution utility. We serve Reading, North Reading, Wilmington, and part of Linfield that we refer to as Linfield Center. We have about 29,000 meter connections. We're governed by a 5-member board of commissioners that's elected by Reading voters. And then there's also a 5-member citizens advisory board that's appointed by the communities that RMLD serves. And they make recommendations to the board of commissioners. Those meetings are open to the public. They're posted on our website. They are currently being held virtually due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So why do we offer some of the programs we're going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about some energy efficiency. We offer education. We offer the programs that we do to increase awareness and accelerate adoption of practices, products, and technologies that provide a multitude of benefits. And the benefits include helping you, our customers, use energy more efficiently, reducing RMLD's electricity usage during expensive peak demand times. And if you are familiar with our Shred the Peak program, you have some understanding of that concept. Helping the environment by reducing carbon emissions, increasing electrification within RMLD's service territory. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And these programs are supported by the energy conservation charge on customers' electric bills. Next slide, please. So what is electrification and why is it important? Electrification is the shift to powering end-use devices with electricity instead of fossil fuels. So the well-known main examples of that, transportation, so electric vehicles, which is what we're talking about here tonight, industrial manufacturing, and heat pumps for space heating and cooling and water heating. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about heat pumps in the next slide. But electrification is essential to reducing carbon emissions. Next slide, please. Oh, one back. Perfect. Thank you. So air source heat pumps. So this shows some of our electrification rebates. So we offer electrification rebates for the purpose of facilitating electrification in our service area for the benefits we already talked about a little bit. One program is our air source heat pump rebate program. Air source heat pumps are a efficient HVAC system that runs 100% on electricity, and it heats and cools the home. It's an all-in-one heating and cooling system. We actually did a webinar on air source heat pumps in early March, and that's on our website. If you're interested in learning more about it, definitely check that out. So we offer a rebate, and that is based on the size of the system that is installed, and it's for both residential and commercial customers. We also offer, through our partner, Abode Energy Management, they offer education and installation consulting, basically. So they'll work with customers because it's a very new technology. It's still very unknown at this point. So they'll work with customers to help them kind of evaluate what their home needs, and they'll work with them through the shopping and installation process. And that's at no cost to the customers. Back one, please, Brian. Okay, so the next rebate is an electrical panel upgrade rebate that's specifically for residential customers. And that's to support electrification activities. So for example, if you want to install a heat pump system and you want to install a level 2 charging station, your electrical panel may not be equipped to support that, and you may need to move to a higher amperage. And so we offer a rebate to help customers do that, to support their electrification activities. And again, that's for residential customers. We also have a cordless electric yard equipment rebate, which is wildly popular, way more popular than we ever anticipated. That's on an assortment of items. So mowers, string trimmers, rototillers, there's a list on our website, but those rebates are available for residential and commercial customers also. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as EV charging stations, we have a rebate for residential customers, and we also have a rebate for commercial customers. On the residential side, we offer a rebate of up to $750 for a level 2 charging station. That's the equipment only. We do ask that customers who get that rebate sign up for our time of use rate for a minimum of 1 year. And we're going to go over the time of use rate a little bit later in the presentation. We also ask that they agree to share their EV charging station data with us, because that helps us to evaluate charging habits, and we can take that information and look at how long-term charging is going to affect the grid. So on the commercial side, the rebate is 50% of costs up to $1,500 per charging station. That's for equipment and installation. Next slide, please. So in addition to rebates, we have some other initiatives and efforts to increase adoption, or facilitate, I should say, increasing the adoption of EVs in our service area. We installed 2 dual port public charging stations at our Ash Street facility. We are looking to transition our fleet to electric as alternatives come to market. As you probably know, vast majority of our fleet is very large, heavy duty equipment. So that is obviously a factor in how quickly we're able to do that transition. But we are watching that closely. In the interim, RMLD does own a all-electric Chevy Bolts, and we also have 4 hybrid, they're not plug-in, but 4 hybrid SUVs. We host educational events throughout the year. Pre-pandemic, we had some EV ride and drive events where dealers would bring vehicles and customers could come and test drive them. We had an electric car show once. Post-pandemic, we've tried to shift to virtual. We're doing this event tonight. We also recorded a couple of virtual test drives with the help of one of our panelists. And those are available on our website, just to have a way people can have that experience without physically going anywhere. So as far as other opportunities, we work to develop viable business models. So for example, looking at, where can charges be placed, who might own them, and coming up with a structure that will work moving forward. We also look for grants and apply whenever it's possible to do so. We recently applied to 2 separate grants through the state of Massachusetts. One was for 6 level 2 charging stations in our service territory. The other was for 5 level 3 charging stations in our service territory. We haven't heard back on those yet, but we are hopeful that we will get some funding, and that will help us to install some more public charging stations within RMLD service territory. Next slide, please. So there are some service considerations where electric utility reliability is obviously the key piece of our mission, that we provide reliable electric service. Level 2 charging stations can impact load, obviously. Currently, there's not enough in the area for it to really make a difference, but as popularity increases, that's something that we need to stay on top on and be aware of so that our distribution system is prepared to handle that additional load. So we're keeping track of EV loads to ensure that the network remains ahead of growing loads of EVs. And that's very important. Next slide, please. Okay, so industry trends and legislation. Car manufacturers are doubling the number of new EV models for sale in 2021. I'm sure all of you folks have seen the increase in mainstream advertising of electric vehicles. There were even some Super Bowl ads for electric vehicles, so it's becoming much more in the mainstream. US unit sales of EVs are forecasted to exceed 1 million in 2024. And then if you look at the chart to the right, I think it's really interesting. In 2021, EV sales volume is around 4%. In 2028, it goes up to almost 18%. So that's a huge increase. Economics is a driver in that. So while many EVs have higher upfront costs, purchase costs, they have lower operating costs and oftentimes lower total ownership costs. So that is a driver. Incentives is a powerful driver as well. And we're gonna go through more of that later on in the presentation, but there are still several incentives to help folks purchase an electric vehicle. And then state legislation is a driver. And I'm sure many of you have seen that the state of Massachusetts recently passed a climate bill, which covered many, many things. But it does touch on electric vehicles, and there is something in there that states that light duty electric vehicle sales will be, or vehicle sales, I should say, will be electric starting in 2035. So there will be no more internal combustion engine vehicle sales of light duty by 2035. So that's huge. That's gonna drive the market significantly. So. Okay, at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Tom, who's going to go through some EV 101 stuff. But before we get into that, Sarah, did we have any questions come through that we need to address now?
No, I think the questions can wait until after Tom does his presentation.
Okay, excellent. All right, I will invite Tom to turn on his video and get going.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Joyce. That was a great intro and great job pulling this whole show together. It's been a lot of effort and a lot of stakeholders, so it'd be a valuable tool. Brian, could you advance to the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to go through some of the basics about EVs. Our EV panel is probably way ahead of me on this since you've been driving these vehicles already. But there's three basic categories of electric vehicles. The first is the all-electric, which we are tending to focus on because that is definitely the trend on where we're all headed. And that is a vehicle that runs solely on electricity. There's no internal combustion engine. You can't use gasoline to make it to power your vehicle. The middle category, or a plug-in hybrid, is a combination. So it has a gasoline engine, an internal combustion engine, but it also has usually a fair size battery on board that can be charged by the vehicle as you're braking, or you can plug it in when you're at your home or a place of business to charge it up. So that gives you sort of the best of both worlds. And the Toyota Prius was really the groundbreaker in that area. That's been around a long time and it's had good success, and it was really established the technology that brought us the all-electric vehicles that we see today. The third category is still really in the much more in the R&D phase. There are hydrogen-powered fuel cell electric vehicles in California. The state of California has done a lot of promotion of those vehicles. And it's essentially the same as an all-electric battery vehicle, except instead of a large battery source, it has a tank of a gaseous hydrogen in the vehicle that allows it to be refueled quicker. But you need an infrastructure of hydrogen fueling stations around. So that's could be a longer term, very successful approach, but it's still very much a new thing. And our discussions today are really focused on the top two. Next slide, Brian, please. All right, as far as the benefits, certainly cost savings is by far the big attraction for electric vehicles. And the fact that you're charging from your outlet in your home or a place of business and not buying gasoline is a major source of those savings, but it's not the only one. And it tends to get all the attention, but the fact that electric vehicles have far fewer moving parts on them, their reliability and their maintenance costs are far cheaper than internal combustion engines. So there's no pistons going up and down, there's no oil to change. So the maintenance costs can be significant. Some estimates are as much as $4,000 or $5,000 in savings of maintenance over the life of the vehicle, which is about comparable to the fuel savings that you would get. I'm going to go into some more specific details on the fueling, but fueling, in summary, can save you as much as $600 a year compared to buying gasoline at current prices. The middle bullet there is environmental benefits. Electric vehicles have some very significant efficiency advantages over gasoline. One great feature is the fact that when the vehicle's not moving, it's not using any energy, as opposed to, think of all the millions of gasoline-powered cars around the country sitting at traffic lights or stuck in traffic. They're still burning fuel, even though they're not really moving. So that is a big source right there. And then with the longer-term trends to address climate change that Joyce talked about earlier, we're all faced with a significant challenge to move us from carbon-based fossil fuels to clean or renewable fuels. And electricity, right now, the power in our grid that we supply to all you customers is a mix. We still, the power plants where we get our power, a lot of that still comes primarily from burning natural gas. But as we shift that away to more solar, hydro, and offshore wind, that can get to the point of zero carbon, and that's really the goal. So we're improving the power side, but we also need to address the load side, because transportation fuel use, energy use accounts for on the order of 50% of all of the environmental carbon emissions in the world. So we can't get to our goals without addressing transportation. So that's what we're doing. And last but not least, all you motorheads will get a enjoyment out of this, is EVs are a surprisingly high performance vehicles. And one of the great attributes of an electric motor is they can get maximum torque from a standstill. Plus there's no transmission, so all that power goes right to the wheels. All right, next slide, please, Brian. Vehicles available, as Joyce mentioned, every year the auto manufacturers are releasing more and more models. So in the early days, it was the Prius or nothing. And then after that, it was really kind of the Tesla or nothing. But now there's really becoming a much broader spectrum of types and quality of vehicles. So every year we're having a better selection, and we're starting to, it's still new, still fairly rare, but we're starting to get to the point where there's used electric vehicles available as a less expensive option. Okay, next slide, please, Brian. The type of charging connectors, the little circles with the funny connection points there, are the 4 major types of connectors. And don't let that scare you that there's all kinds of different connectors. The one at the top is really the primary standard across the country that pretty much every vehicle has that available. Some of the others have additional types, and all of those also have adapters. So even though you're at a different station, but by far the big driver for this, and most of what our attention is on the level 2 chargers with the standard 1772 connection. The other difference I want to talk about is level 1 versus level 2. And the level 1 is a charger that comes with every electric vehicle. It's a very inexpensive charger that you can keep in your trunk or under your seat, and it has a standard 110 volt outlet plug on it that can plug into any electric outlet anywhere. The problem with that is it's very low power level, and it's more like a trickle charger. So it takes a long time to move enough energy through that wall plug into your vehicle to significantly charge up your battery. So it's great if you're stuck somewhere in an emergency, you have to just get a few more miles so you can get to where you're going. But the primary day-to-day workhorse is the level 2 charger. So that is what you would typically purchase to put in your home, or would be available at most of the public charging stations. And that plugs into a 240 volt outlet, which is typically what you'd see for a larger appliance like your clothes dryer or an electric range. So because of the heft of that connector and the wires going to it, it can move a lot more power quickly from the grid through the charger into the vehicle. And those type of chargers typically can add as much as 25 miles of range per hour of charging. The last category, which is starting to become more and more available, is the DC fast charge units. So those are what we need if we were going to drive from here across country or from here to Florida. So those would be in the rest stops, say. So those are very high power units that can charge, give you a full charge in anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. And Tesla has really been the driver of a lot of those. They have a very wide-ranging network of fast chargers across the country. Okay, Brian. Where to charge? So although EVs are still relatively new, so far the trend has shown that absolutely charging at home is the predominant method of getting energy from the grid into your vehicle. So that's typically on the order of 80% of the time at home or near your home, if you don't have a single family home, is where your day-to-day charging would go. So you come home from work or from school, you plug in your vehicle and you have dinner and go to bed. When you wake up in the morning, your vehicle is fully charged. So that's primarily the scenario of day-to-day charging. The next likely spot is at your workplace. And that would be a scenario where maybe you have a long drive from your home to work. So when you get to the office, you want to be able to plug in your car to top it off to make sure you can get home or go on to your next destination. But since most people, since the typical range of the new EVs are on the order of 200 miles or so, some of them even higher than that, it's really unusual that you have to charge at work. You know, if you live 100 miles from your home to your office, that's a long commute. So yes, that might be a case, but it's typically more that you're topping it off because the car is sitting there anyway. And then on the go is the fast chargers I mentioned before, the level 2 or even the level 3, the fast chargers that you'd see at a rest stop. For new EV drivers, one of the first concerns they have is, well, how do I know where these public charging stations are? And I don't see them around, but very quickly you can figure that out. And it's a great application for the cell phone apps. There's literally dozens of different plug share. ChargePoint has them. So on your phone, you can pull up a map, like a Google map, and it can show you where the closest charging stations are. So that's becoming more and more of a standard feature on cell phones, and would come along with your vehicle. Okay, next. When to charge. Certainly bears into the discussion Joyce had earlier about reliability and maximizing the efficiency of how we, as the operator of the grid that serves all of you folks, we want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. And the primary way we do that is to ensure that these vehicles are charged during our off-peak hours. That way, it's times at night or on weekends when the grid isn't really being taxed. So we're not straining our transformers or our wires or the power plants. And from your point of view, it's when our rates are less expensive. So it's definitely also a more cost-effective way to charge your vehicles. And that's the primary reason that to be eligible for our level 2 rebate, we do require that you sign up for our time of use rate. It's not mandatory that you have to charge during off-peak hours. If you have to go somewhere and your car needs a charge and you have to do it during on-peak, then that's not a problem at all. It just might be a little bit more expensive on that particular day. And the other thing, the charging apps that I talked about are almost all of them are Wi-Fi capable. So even though you may get home at 4 or 5 o'clock and physically put the connector on your vehicle, the application that schedules the charging is smart enough to know, okay, it knows that the power is on the grid and the batteries, the car's here, but I'm not going to start charging until 7 p.m. when the rates drop to lower. Or you can schedule it for other times as well. And you always have the option to override that. Next. Okay, so in looking at the fuel cost comparison, again, this is about half of the savings we talked about. Half of the savings is from lower maintenance cost, and half is because electric energy is overall less expensive than buying gasoline and moving your car around that way. So these are a summary of two scenarios for current pricing in Massachusetts. At $2.74 a gallon, if your vehicle gets 28 miles a gallon and you typically drive 12,000 miles, you're spending around $1,200 a year or $100 a month on gasoline. So with an electric vehicle, RMLD typical rates for residential is around 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And those are the specs for an average electric vehicle. The fueling cost, if you will, is about half of the gasoline, or $600. So so you're paying $600 a year in electric cost to power your vehicle. So yes, you're definitely going to see your electric bill go up on the order of $50 a month. So your electric bill goes up, but your gasoline bill goes down by more than that. So your electric bill goes up $50, but your gasoline bill goes down $100. So you get a net savings of around $600 a year. Next. This is the last slide, and it's just more of a reference for future. There's a number of links here that you can look up to get the detailed information that when you get to the point where you're serious about shopping around for a vehicle, there's a broad range of incentives and tax credits available in addition to RMLD's rebate on the charger. There's vehicle credits at the federal, state level that can be very, very significant. So I urge you to do your homework, and when you're comparing amongst all the different cars, of course, and also for the incentives. Next, or I think that's it. Yes, okay, that's it. So it's probably a good time to break now for questions, because I've been droning on too long, and I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, so Tom, there are a few questions. What is the typical cost to upgrade my service to accommodate a charging station in my home?
Yeah, if you have, say, the standard in a residential home used to be a 100 amp service panel. Nowadays, it's more like 200 amp is the standard for a new home. And some of the larger homes, it's even 400 amps. So the most common upgrade is taking out a 100 amp service, the electrical panel, you know, where your circuit breakers are, taking that out and putting in one that's rated for 200 amps. And that process, it varies a lot depending on the age and of your house and where it's configured. But the range is probably somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000. It can be quite high depending on the condition, but it's in that range. So I would plan on an average of around $2,000. And our rebate for that is $500.
Great, thank you, Tom. Can you talk a little bit about how the charge works for public chargers, say at the one at RMLD's Ash Street facility?
Yes, the public chargers that we own are managed through the ChargePoint system. So ChargePoint is the supplier. They make the chargers, and more importantly, they run the network that communicates with the chargers and reads your credit card or they're really more cell phone driven now. It reads a code off of your phone. So it manages those charges. So you essentially join their membership club, so you get an account at ChargePoint, and then when you drive up to the charging station, you go up to the panel and access it and says, "Oh, this is John Smith. I know your account is, plug in," and then any charges that are accrued while you're in that charging session, you would add to your account for that month. And the actual prices they charge do vary quite a bit, but the average is around 20 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. But that works out to, usually it's anywhere from $2 to $4 per session. So you're parked for an hour or two while you're shopping, and you come back, and that day you're paying an extra $5 on your ChargePoint account.
Great. How does the move towards a more electrical fueled lifestyle affect our overall grid system? I think this customer is thinking about the electrical grid failure that happened in Texas earlier this winter.
Great question. It's a significant challenge to the entire electric utility industry in the country. And some estimates are as high as if you look at the size of the grid we have now, if we got to the point of full electrification, we would essentially have to double it. So we have to keep what we have now operating, convert it over to clean renewable power, and double it in size. So it's a bit of a challenge, but there's a lot of smart people working on it across the country, and we're trying to do our part to get us set up to be successful in doing that. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it's quickly in utility industry terms, especially when you look at that kind of scope.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think most of the questions here I'm going to leave for the panel that's coming up next. But Tom, maybe before we do that, you could just quickly walk through the steps that customers would go through to get a rebate for their charger. So just how the rebate process works.
Sure. If you go to our website, there's a link which brings you to an online web portal where you fill out a form with all the pertinent information. But the essential steps are you're going to have a receipt, an invoice that for the charger. You know, I bought a Tesla wall connector charger and I paid $500 for it. Here's my invoice. And as Joyce mentioned, to get the rebate, you have to sign up for our time of use rate. So if you're not on our time of use rate, you'd have to call our customer service. That's a simple step. You just call customer service anytime and request to be have your service upgraded to time of use. There's no charge for that. We do have to send a technician to your house to physically change our meter. So we take off our standard meter and put in a time use meter. So there's like a 5-minute power outage, but there's no charge to do that. So you have to be on the time of use rate, and you do need to sign the document that says you understand or you will allow us to analyze your data. We're not, selling it or doing anything to charge you additional money. It's more just to manage our infrastructure to see trends in how EV usage compares to non-EV homes.
Perfect.
One other important step on that the charger has to be installed by a licensed electrician. So all 4 of our towns require an electrical permit for that. So you'd have to contact the local town hall or building department or your electrician really does it for you, but they charge $50 or $100 or some fee for the permit. And then after the charger is installed by this licensed electrician, the town wiring inspector has to come to the house and look at it and inspect it, make sure it's safe. That's a simple thing. It takes 5 or 10 minutes, but it is an important step that is part of the process.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm going to pass it over to Joyce to get into the EV owner panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom, very much. You can go ahead and shut your camera off, and I'm going to ask, so we put together some FAQs, and as we have 9 very generous panelists who have volunteered to participate, we broke out the questions into groupings, and we have a few panelists that are going to go through each group. So that's kind of the structure. That's how we're going to go about the panel discussion. So here are the very high level topics. Again, we're going to get into a lot of details. I see some questions coming in. Hopefully we're going to address them as we go. And we will take a look at questions at the end to see if there's any that we have not addressed. So at this point, I'm going to invite Daniel F., Adi, Kathy, and Eric to get their cameras on so we can start our discussion. Just before we get started, I also wanted to note that RMLD does not endorse any specific vehicle, dealership, equipment manufacturer, or installer. The discussion tonight is intended to be of a general nature, so the panelists, who are your neighbors, can share their experiences about purchasing, owning, and driving an EV. So, all right, let's get started. Brian, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is all of our panelists, but wanted you to have a point of reference as folks are talking. So you can see, where they live, what they drive, do they have a home level 2 charger installed, and then how long have they been driving electric. So the same slide will be up throughout. The first category is charging and battery range. So let's first talk about where, when, and how you typically charge. And I'm gonna call on Eric to get us started, just so we can have kind of a starting point for the conversation. And I think we'll flow freely after that.
Okay, thank you. I assume you can hear me.
Yes.
Joyce, I don't think I can share my screen, but I'll say this. If you want to look at that while I talk, I can maybe show the audience how I typically charge. But my typical behavior is I don't charge the car to 100%. My car has a 300-mile range. Usually what I do is every night I charge the car. I have the time of use meter and I can schedule charging with my car. So I set the vehicle up to charge up to 60% every night. And during a given day, like pre-COVID, when I was driving to work in Lowell, during the day and during regular use, I would bring the charge down to maybe 40% or something like that. So I would charge every night to 60%. And then during the day, typically I would discharge the battery down to 40%. The reason why I do that is twofold. One is it's more efficient to charge and discharge the battery in the middle of the range. Secondly, it keeps the battery happy. Although I can charge and do charge the vehicle to 100%, it puts a little bit of stress on the battery and can affect longevity. And so what I do is I only charge it to 60% on a day-by-day basis, and I use a small part of the range. Before I go on a long trip, I will charge it to 100% and I'll get the maximum range.
Great, thank you. So that speaks a little bit to kind of long-term battery life and strategies to maximize that. So that's great, thank you. Adi, do you want to weigh in on your day-to-day, kind of where, when, how you typically charge?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Joyce, thanks for organizing this. Great work so far.
Thank you.
So I just bought the car last December. So it's about like 5 months in the middle of the pandemic. So I haven't really driven anywhere outside the town and maybe one trip to Western Mass. But I think what I read everywhere is, so I have a level 2 charger installed like a garage. And it's like a habit, like you come home, right? Like come home, you take off shoes, and then maybe you just put the car for charging, and that just becomes your second nature. For me, the Kona surprised me, like it has a range of 260 miles. And very seldom I have gone below like 50% charge. And that's because of my laziness, where I haven't just charged for the night. But the level 2 is fantastic. I use it once a week now, again, because I'm not driving. I've been working from home for a year and a half. But the level 2 like just takes it from a 20-30 mile range to 260 like within 7 hours. And I love that feature. Just like Eric, controlling it from the app and looking at all the cost and energy trends, it's something cool to do as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank
you. Dan, why don't you weigh in on your charging habits and how you typically charge?
Sure, I'm the same as Eric. I don't charge to 100% very often. Only on long trips. I have it on a timer. I have a Tesla, so it's programmed to start every night at 7 p.m. so I can take advantage of the lower rates. I do have the time of use rate, and I have a Tesla wall charger, which RMLD kindly rebated the price of it for me. So I'm loving that. I also don't go below 10%. They don't recommend that you do that because you could damage the battery long term. and it could go into limp mode if you go below 5%. It's similar to driving a gasoline car. If you go too empty and driving on fumes, you might find yourself stranded at the side of the road. So I'm really working with the middle 80% of the battery all the time. And just like Eric said, my car is rated for over 300 miles for a full battery. So 80% of a full battery is about 250, 260 miles. Last summer, I had a sick relative in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and I was driving weekly from here to Fairfield. It's a 300-mile round trip. And so I had quite a bit of, I put 10,000 miles on the car last year, just doing that. And I never tried to squeak out the last 300 miles out of the battery. I always stopped at a public charger on the way home, either on I-84 in Connecticut or on the Mass Pike. And as we heard earlier, Tesla has a whole network of superchargers, and they're spaced about every 30 miles on the interstate highway. So you can drive anywhere in America and pull in and get a 50% charge in 20 minutes. You wouldn't want to sit around and try to top it off because as the battery heats up, as it's being charged, it slows down the charging. So if you want to squeak out that last, you want to top off that last 20%, it might take you another 40 minutes just to get that. So I always would go down to about 10% and then put in 50% to get me home. And then I'd plug in when I got home.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you for that. And you both spoke, or a couple of you spoke about long distance driving, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, I wanted to ask Kathy, because Kathy is, I believe, our only panelist that does not have a level 2 charging station installed at home. Kathy, are you still with us? Can you turn on your mic and your video and give us some feedback on how you, oh, there you go.
There you go.
There you go. Can you tell us a little bit about how you charge your bolts?
Yeah, well, I'm retired, and so I just sort of bop around, but I have gone on one trip up to Maine. But I charge it with my level 1 charger, and I have no problems. I'm on time of use. I program it so that it charges from 7 to noon the next day, and it just I guess maybe I don't use that much. I rarely go below 100 miles left on the battery, and it just seems to be fine for me.
Yeah.
And I have solar panels. The question there is, should I be using the solar, the energy I create with solar to charge this thing, or shall I really use the nighttime rate?
Right.
So
that makes a lot of sense. You'd have to look at your production of your system, and you may make enough where you make enough to charge your vehicle during the day and maybe even give some back to the grid. So that's a very, very good point. So we talked a little bit about long trips, and I know Tesla, as Daniel mentioned, has charging stations pretty regularly placed along interstates. So I'm going to toss this question to Adi, I think, because you mentioned you took a trip to Western Mass. So what was your experience with charging during that trip, and how did you manage?
Yeah, so very honestly, I think the first couple of trips people need to take with electric car, and I speak by my very bad planning. I didn't plan the route through, right? I mean, there's like, I think Tom said about all these app, plug share and everything. I should have looked at all the stations on the way. I was confident that my 260 miles was going to get me through without issues, but then I didn't account for the cold weather. I didn't account for my heavy foot on the accelerator.
Yeah.
And so very honestly, while coming back, I was a little nervous, right? And then I had to wait at Charlton service station for 30 minutes to get that charge, as Daniel said, up to 20, 40, 50% or so. But now I know where the stations are with a little bit of planning and having a level 1 charger in the trunk. I think those trips should be painless, but it's all about planning, I feel. I don't know how the regular long-term people, long drivers feel. But for me, knowing where the stations are and knowing what your car can deliver in different conditions, I think it's a little bit of game of adjusting your personal driving as well.
Yeah, I've heard other owners say that as well. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm gonna let anybody who wants to answer this question go ahead and do so. Somebody brought up the winter time. I think it was you, Adi, actually. So I'd love for somebody to start the conversation of how does your range change in the winter time? Maybe Adi, you could start because you mentioned that.
Sure. I mean, it did drop. And again, this is just me rediscovering the car, right? It's like being in a new relationship. You start finding out what your partner likes and doesn't. So
Sure.
here I am sitting in like 10-degree weather very nicely in my house, and I turn on the auto heat feature. And I don't realize, it doesn't strike me that all these things do take up the toll on the battery at some point of time or immediately. So I start driving and the range drops from 258. You can immediately see at the start it drops by 40 miles or so. I'm just throwing out a number. And then your heat is turned out to 75 instead of say 69, and that changes the number a little bit. Your seat warmers, if the whole car is being heating or just the driver's side. So in my personal opinion, the 6 months of driving, weather and all these things do have an impact. But again, it's all about knowing it and managing it as you start driving more and more.
Yeah.
If
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, if I could comment, I know there's a lot of focus on the range of the vehicle, like say in the range of the vehicle during winter time, or what happens if you get stuck. The way a lot of people use their vehicles is they never really use the full range of the battery. So the absolute range of the vehicle, I would argue, doesn't really matter, because if, like say in my case, I only charge it 60% every night, and I only do it charge it fully for long trips. So, you know, if when I drive to work, like I'm pretty nerdy. I have a lot of data on my Tesla. I can get that out, but the efficiency, the power efficiency of my vehicle, of my Model 3, only changes about 10% over the year. But every single night, I charge it to 60%. And yeah, maybe in the summertime, I only use 10% going to and from work. And in the wintertime, maybe it goes to 12%. I lose 12%, but I never worry about it, the absolute range of the car. And I'm a bit of a zealot too. Actually heating the car uses a fair amount of power.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yep.
I'm crazy. Not because I'm worried about range, but because I'm pretty green, and I use the seat warmers. The seat warmers don't affect the range at all. To actually heat up the whole cabin takes a lot more energy, and I take pity on my family when they're in the car and I run the heater. But if I'm alone, I don't do it. It's kind of like a test of strength.
Oh, I wouldn't like riding with you then.
I would put the heat on for you, Joyce.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. That's very kind.
Joyce, if I could just say
Yes, please.
that a happy battery is a warm battery. And so Tesla recommends you precondition your battery before you leave the house. So if you're having your coffee in the morning, I just get on my smartphone and I start the heat in the car, and that heats the cabin, but it also heats the battery. And then I mentioned the network of chargers that Tesla has across the country. On the navigation screen, on the dashboard, you see these icons, and if you touch it, it not only tells you the address of the charging station, the Tesla charging station, but it tells you how many stations are being used and how many aren't, so whether it's crowded or not. And then you can navigate to it. So it gives you turn by turn directions. And as it gets closer, it starts to warm the battery, so that when you get to the charging station, it's at the optimum temperature to receive the electricity when you plug it in. So these are some of the tricks that or things that Tesla has designed into it to optimize battery charging optimally. And if it's hot, it cools the battery. There's a cooling and heating system that runs through the battery.
almost like auto start, but for an electric
Exactly.
vehicle.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I don't know,
I can
Adi,
add
Kathy,
something there
do you-
too. If
Oh, sure. Yeah. Do you want to turn on your
yeah.
video, Rick? There you go.
Yeah, I just fired it up. Yeah, the one thing I'll also add to like the heating and cooling and like the HVAC systems is unlike a gas car, I mean, you're sitting on a battery that can drive the HVAC pretty much at all times. And so I find it really nice, like in the heat of the summer, if I'm going grocery shopping or I'm out doing errands, like I will leave the car and you can just leave the air conditioning running, or you can leave the heating running. It's not like a gas car where you have to leave the engine on. In an electric vehicle, it's basically like mostly always on. So you can run it forever. And the drain on the battery is super negligible. So it's really nice to like come out and have a frosty car in like 80-degree summer heat.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about kind of dovetails into another category that we have, which is battery life and kind of long-term, how you maintain battery life. You've touched on some of those things already. So I'm going to skip ahead to that category, I think. But before we move forward, Daniel, Adi, Eric, Kathy, is there any additional items you want to share about charging that you think we're not going to cover in the next section?
All good. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy, you good?
Yeah, one thing I think that's pretty interesting is all the networks there are out there for non-Tesla cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we get clarified, like if we can sort of charge it when not have to have an account at all these networks. You
Sure.
see what I mean? Maybe somebody
Yeah.
knows that. I'm not that familiar with it since I charge mostly at home. But with all the networks out there, I know I have one for EVgo, I have one for Electrify America, I have one for ChargePoint, and I would like to have just one account and be able to charge at any of these
Go
charging
anywhere, yeah.
stations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could pick up that one.
Mhm.
So in my practice, I did a bit of research, and in different charges say that a lot of progressive businesses have chargers that they're installing at the office. So, you know, I game it at my work in Lowell when I was pre-COVID. When I was going there, I could charge for free every day. I took my daughter down to the public garden the other day. I charged underneath the commons. There was a free charger there. I just used my ChargePoint account. Many of the level 2 chargers all over the place at shopping malls or whatever. You can find a lot of options where it's free. I took my Model 3 to Chicago. I like to support people that support electric vehicles, and I would pick hotels that had level 2 chargers at the hotel. So I could go there. I didn't have to use a Tesla supercharger. I check into the hotel and I just charge my car overnight for free. So as you get acclimated to, you know, certain commuting choices and stuff like that, I've never been suffering for want of a charger. Okay.
Yeah. That's great. I think also the PlugShare app, the PlugShare, you can access it through a regular internet browser. And I believe there's also an app, and you can search by network, the type of adapter you have for your car. So it allows you to filter to find the stations that will work for you based on what you have as well. So somebody had mentioned in the chat or in the Q&A, I should say, the different types of adapters or plugs. I believe that has streamlined significantly recently, but I didn't know if any of you had any input on that before we move on to the next category.
I only use my J1772 if I'm away from the house or not at a Tesla supercharger. Every public charger that I've been to supports J1772.
Yeah, and for the Kona on the EVgo or the Electrify America or the 3 other brands Kathy mentioned, I think it's the CCS2 combo. If I might be getting the letters wrong,
For
but
DC fast charging, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So most of the service stations for non-Teslas, they work for that.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, we are definitely, we have a lot still to go. So to continue the discussion on battery life, we are going to, Eric's going to stay up, Stephen and Dan B. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so the conversation kind of started already, but if folks could talk about what are some of the strategies that you use to prolong your battery life? How do you keep it as efficient as possible? And I'll let any of you start.
Before we get started, I'd like to address one of Kathy's questions. She mentioned that she had solar panels and when to charge with solar panels.
Sure.
And I also have solar panels and the time of use rate. And I think that's going to be more and more common as people get home solar, and people are obviously going to be getting electric cars in the near future. So my solar panel system is rated at 10 kilowatts, and my charge point home to charge my Tesla or my plug-in hybrid runs at 7.5 kilowatts. So if the sun's shining and I plug my car in, I've got plenty of extra to charge my car and power my house and sell some back to RMLD all at the same time. So Kathy, especially if you're using level 1, if the sun's shining, plug in your car, because you're going to save money that way and hopefully save some electricity.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dan.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so strategies to maintain your battery's life.
I can take a shot at that, Joyce.
Sure.
So as some other people have talked about, like Eric on the call earlier, most all the EVs on the market allow you to set a target max on what you're charging your car to. And by doing so, the batteries, as they've talked about, have a happy area kind of in the middle. It's when you push the batteries to the extremes, 100% full, 0 completely dead, empty, you're stressing them. And this isn't just unique to EVs. This is true of your iPhone or your laptop's battery or anything like that. So the important thing is you want to try and stay away from those extremes if you don't need them, because as others have said, you probably don't need the full range. I have a Bolt that's rated about 260 miles. Even when I was commuting to Chelmsford, I was using a tiny fraction of that battery, whether it be the winter or the summer, going back and forth. So the only times you really need that full range is if you're going to go for a long distance. So if you're thinking about this car in terms of something I want to keep for hundreds of thousands of miles, and what can I do to get that life out of that battery, avoiding the extremes on the battery are the important things to do. As others have talked about, it's also important temperature management of the battery. And the good news is most all major manufacturers, whether it's Tesla, GM, Ford, all have thermal management systems built into their cars. What that means is there's a coolant loop that can go through a heater or a cooling system similar to air conditioner to keep those batteries in their happy place so that they're not getting pushed to the extremes of where they're at. So that's also really important too. I think the last important thing to think about is as most people said on here, they're charging either with a level 2 or level 1 charger. And those are fine, that's great, and it's going to cover most of your use. The DC fast charging is probably the most stress on the batteries because it charges it faster, which generates more heat. But being realistic, those are not the chargers you're going to use every day. I'd be really surprised if anybody on here is going to drive their car 250 miles every day, day in out. So they're on a DC fast charger every day, trying to get every last mile out of the car. It's just not realistically how people live on it. So charging on a level 1, level 2 charger keeps that stress level down. But that doesn't mean avoid them on a long trip. It's just you're probably not going to use those every day.
Yeah, I agree with what Steve is saying. I think the way I think of it is you have the range of the battery. I use the full range of the battery when I need it. I do not discharge it all the way down because why go down to zero margin when I'm driving? So I use the middle of the range. It's about the habits that you follow every day. And so habitually, I use a level 2 charger. I limit the range. I have some software that I use to monitor the battery capacity. My car started with a rated range of 310 miles. I am 2.5 years into it. I bought it in September of 2018. I have 300-mile range on the car with the current battery, and I have 30,000 miles on it. Now, the thing which is interesting about the software I use, they also compare it to other Teslas that have been driven about as far as mine. And I'm in like the 95th percentile for similarly aged vehicles. So I don't know for
Doing well.
sure, but I will say that the data suggests that you, as far as your day-to-day habits, if you're good to the vehicle will be good to you. If you're going to use it as a taxi and seriously deplete it every day and use fast chargers, it's going to affect the longevity of it. But my battery is warranted for 10 years. So it's going to last more, it's going to last longer than the body is going to last. So I don't worry about it.
Gotcha. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
I think the Tesla warranty is currently, or the one on my car's an older car, 2014, but the warranty was 8 years or 150,000 miles. I only have 50,000 miles, but I'm coming up on 8 years. But you know, I've heard of people who have driven the batteries for 450,000 miles. So I don't know that that's a huge concern. You know, worrying about the wear and tear on the battery. And I would just suggest for people to just plan your trips. You know, if you're driving an electric car, you don't want to be left in a situation where you're running on 10% of electricity, because you can miss an exit on the Mass Pike and get into a problem. So, you know, just like a gasoline vehicle, plan your trips. One thing that I think a lot of folks probably don't understand is that the Tesla chargers are specifically for Tesla vehicles. So you can't charge another vehicle on the charger, but the charge point chargers, you can buy a little adapter that plugs those into a Tesla, but in every other car will charge on those. And there are other, one of the other gentlemen mentioned that there's level 3 chargers that don't work with the Tesla. So it's just, you got to know what your vehicle's going to accept, and when you're planning your trip, you got to know what you're going to run into along the way.
Sure. That's great. Thank you. So Eric, you mentioned you have a 10-year warranty on your battery. Stephen, I think you have a Bolt. Is there a warranty on your battery as well?
It's 8 years, 100,000 miles.
Okay. And then Dan, you have the plug-in hybrid. Is that the one you mentioned that's 2014?
That one is 2017. I have the Prius Prime plug-in, and I don't know what Toyota's warranty is. I know Tesla's warranty for my old Model S.
Gotcha. But it sounds like people just need to look into whatever car they're interested in, what warranties might be available for that.
Yeah, and I think the plug-in hybrids are just a different kind of beast, where you don't worry so much about the battery anyway. It's not
true. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. So we neglected to talk about regenerative braking when we were talking about charging a little bit earlier. Does that have any impact on maintaining your battery's life, utilizing regenerative braking in kind of a strategic way? And can maybe one of you take a shot at explaining what that is? Because I don't think we covered that earlier in the presentation.
Well, regenerative braking is when you take your foot off the accelerator and the motor actually works in reverse. So the motor acts as a generator and converts some of the energy and motion of the vehicle into, it actually puts drag on the wheels as it goes into generation mode. It takes that generated electricity and puts it back into the battery. So when you have an electric vehicle, you you tend to drive with one pedal. I tend not to use the brake at all. If you have to stop short, you have to use the brake to stop short. But the net effect of regenerative braking is that it improves the average range of your vehicle. Okay, so if you're driving on the highway and you wouldn't be using the brakes at all, regenerative braking won't help you very much. But if you're driving around the city and you're doing a lot of stop and go and you mastered the art of one pedal driving, it'll improve your mileage much beyond what it would otherwise be.
Gotcha. And I know in that vein, somebody I know asked, similarly to gas cars, if you accelerate more aggressively, that does impact your range as well, just like what Eric is describing with regenerative driving.
Yep, that's right, Joyce. And what's nice is a lot of the cars have some kind of gauge or coach or something on the dashboard that gives you a clue as to whether you're driving efficiently or not, because over certain speeds, like on the highway, no matter how slippery your car is, how efficient it is, you're still pushing wind out of the way. Same deal with acceleration. If you're excessively accelerating, then yes, you're wasting energy to burn your tires to take off quickly. It's fun to do though, because it takes off so quickly.
Very quick.
It
yeah,
isn't
definitely.
And the other thing to add to the regenerative braking that's kind of neat is a lot of cars have the ability to customize the mode as to how they work. In the most basic mode, you put it in drive like you would with your gas car, and when you hit the brake, it initially regeneratively brakes. And then if you start asking for more and more stopping, where you're pushing that pedal harder, then it'll go to the point of starting to grab the calipers like a traditional car to slow itself down. One of the neat benefits about that maintenance side of things is now you're recapturing that energy, which is recharging your batteries, but you're also not putting the wear on your brakes like you would in a traditional gas car, because that slowdown effect that's recapturing the energy is slowing down the car, and instead you're capturing that energy rather than putting it towards heating the rotors up on your car. So you'll find your brakes are going to last a lot longer on them on your car than they will in a traditional car.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Did you have something to add, Dan?
No, I'm all set, thanks.
Okay. All right. So I think this is a really good discussion, but we still have so much more. So we're going to move on to the next part, which is price and operating costs. So what you just mentioned, Stephen, was a great caveat. So for price and operating costs, I'm going to ask Rick, Kathy, Dan B, who's already here with us, and Dawn to join us to talk about that. Oh, I love it, Dawn. You got the background there. It's great. Okay. Do we still have Kathy here?
I'm here.
Okay, great. I'm going to start with you because I want to make sure we address this piece. So,
Okay.
Just to confirm, and you can just raise your hands or thumbs up or down, all of you bought your cars new, not used. Is that correct?
Well, I'm leasing.
You're leasing, but it was a new vehicle.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
correct. Okay, great. All right. So,
Actually, I bought my Prius Prime new, but the Tesla Model S I bought used.
oh, you did. Okay. Okay. What was your experience with buying that used? Anything to know you want to share?
It was it's a 2014, but it has only 50,000 miles on it, so it, I don't know. It was very different from buying a new one, other than it was much less expensive.
Right. I was going to say the cost was, you probably couldn't beat the cost or the price, but you don't get the incentives if you buy used.
That's correct.
Okay. And then Kathy, you leased, and I know that you wanted to share a few things about how that was a little bit different, specifically with incentives. So why don't you go ahead and share that?
Yes, you don't get the federal incentive if you lease, but you still have to pay. This is my little pet peeve, but you still have to pay your excise tax. They own the car, so they get this. They get the federal incentive, and they own the car, but I have to pay the excise tax. But it's still worth it. I mean, what have I done so far? I think I've only rotated the tires. That's it.
Excellent caveat. So let's talk a little bit about maintenance costs because they are significantly decreased with electric vehicles. So Kathy, you've had your car for how many years and all you've had to do is rotate the tires?
Yes, it's almost 3 years now.
Awesome. All right, I will let any of you gentlemen jump in to share your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar boat. I upgraded from a nice car, a gas car, and I tinkered on my car quite a bit. It's been pretty boring with the EV. I've just had to rotate my tires in the first year. I have friends who've had EVs for like multiple years, and you know, the service that they tend to see over time is like flushing the brake fluids every 2 years. And if you're coming from a gasoline car, that might sound like a long time, but again, it's because you aren't frequently using the brakes in an EV. You're using regenerative charging to slow your car. So brakes rarely get used. There's stories of like brake calipers and brake pads lasting for like tens of thousands, like up to 100,000 miles, which is pretty insane. So yeah, it's pretty boring. A good thing.
Okay, Don, did you have something you wanted to add there?
No, I mean, I think the other folks have kind of talked about it, and I guess I've been looking at it because I'm fairly new to it. Like I was looking at a number of the panelists are also, but you know, I think one of the big challenges when you first look at it is the, you know, initial upfront cost of trying to get into a vehicle, and it's really important to take a look at the rebates that are there, even from RMLD, how much that took off of just getting the charging in. Then you layer in just the fact that you're just not dealing with the maintenance costs that you deal with an engine car. You know, it's just been great. I came from an Audi, and fun car to drive, but just pain in the butt to maintain.
Yeah, right.
And so yeah, so I really think that you can take a look at it over a year or two basis. And I really liked what I think it was Tom presented earlier on the actual difference in the costs, electricity versus gas. So just would encourage folks to really look at that, and you'll see that you can easily offset these initial costs, upfront costs very quickly.
Sure. Dan, you have the hybrid. Oh, I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I was going to say, we've mentioned the federal rebates a bunch of times, and it's actually important to note that on some of the car manufacturers, the federal rebate no longer applies. So like Tesla's, the federal incentive, if you were to buy today, it expired last year. So it doesn't qualify anymore. So it's important to check to see if those rebates like actually apply to the car you're buying.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. And I know there's some criteria around the state rebate as well. The car has to be new, has to cost less than $50,000, and there's some other criteria. So definitely a good thing to bring up. Dan, did you have anything to add as far as maintenance with your hybrid, your plug-in hybrid Prius?
Well, the Prius that I have, the plug-in, you know, I plug it in with my ChargePoint home charger, but you still have to change the oil and all that sort of stuff. You do get a lot of that benefit of just it being a hybrid vehicle. You get regenerative braking. You get not having to change the brake pads as often. You know, with a plug-in hybrid vehicle, you get a certain amount of range on electricity, and then you switch over to gasoline. But prior to having the Prius Prime, I had a couple of old Priuses, and the rate you get and the mileage you get on a gallon of gas is really great in those cars anyways. And the Prius Prime, I would get 50 with the Prius. With the Prius Prime, before I gave it to my son anyways, I got 120 miles per gallon on it because you get 25 miles. You know, if I'm going back and forth to work, I don't use any gas, so you really do get a huge benefit from a plug-in hybrid. You know, it's different from the electric car, but you also don't have the worry of planning your trips with chargers and that sort of thing. My son taken my Prius Prime out to California, and I wouldn't send him out there with an electric car because there's things he can run into. He can run into problems, and it's a 3,000 mile drive, and all that stopping could be difficult. But with the hybrid car, he plugs it in when he can, and he's got the gasoline to take him, and he still gets good gas mileage. So.
Right, added security to get you there. We talked about the time of use rates. I think some of you are on the time of use rate. So I guess for those of you who are, talk about the impacts to your electric bill. And then also those of you who aren't, maybe you could talk a little bit about the impacts to your electric bill and what you've seen. And I know, Dan, you have solar, so that changes the whole thing. So if y'all could just take a few seconds and talk about that.
Yeah,
I could-
I
go
can
ahead,
get
Brett.
started. I'm on time of use, and I found it pretty convenient. It didn't really, when I was originally looking into it, I was thinking that it was going to be a really small window of time every day that would be a lower rate versus a higher rate. And I was really pleased when I was emailing back and forth with the RMLD team to kind of talk about it before I did it, how helpful they were in analyzing my bills to kind of see retroactively what the impact may have been. I thought that was great. When, you know, I pulled the trigger and decided to do it, if I had maintained my existing energy habits, I would have had a cheaper bill to begin with. But it became this game where all of a sudden, like, everything got shifted to be on 7 p.m., like running the washing machine or the dishwasher or charging the car. And so, like, we saw an even more dramatic shift in our electric bills. And that's accounting for the fact that, like, my wife and I are working from home pretty much all year. So we were home from 12 to 7, which is the higher cost time. But overall, everything just, it dropped pretty dramatically. And the cars are really easy to schedule off hours.
Awesome. I think, Dawn, you wanted to
Yeah,
speak to that.
just real quick, I've really liked now seeing that. So now I get to see the, you know, the time of use breakdown. And the funny thing for me is I had my charger installed in December, like December 10th, I think it was. And it's now, I just got the bill, most recent bill. I'm still working off my credit that I got for the rebate. So I haven't paid a bill, RMLD bill since November. It's just about towards the end of it. So no, it's been great, you know, seeing it. And my numbers are similar to what Tom had presented earlier in terms of cost per kilowatt hour. So you know, I'm paying about a third to a quarter of what I was before in terms of just comparative vehicle costs
Vehicle costs
usage.
overall. Gotcha. Great. Tom, did you put your hand up because you wanted to jump into this conversation? Tom Olilla?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could add one other thing on the time of use rate, I had one slide that looked at electric fueling versus gasoline fueling. And in the electric fuel, I used our average RMLD rate of around 15 cents a kilowatt hour. If you only charge at the off-peak time of use rate, that number is actually 11 cents. So the savings could be even more than what I calculated there.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. That's great. All right. It's 8:27. We have 3 minutes left. So I don't want to end things prematurely, but we do have one more category I really want to get to, which is performance. So for that category, we have Greg, Rick, Stephen, and Adi. And I think to start off, we've all talked about the regenerative braking part. We've talked about instant torque. So we know that's a really fun feature of the electric vehicles. Why don't we start off, because we're in New England, you know, it's cold, snowy. Maybe somebody could speak to how your vehicle did in the snow. Did you have any specific concerns? You have to make any specific changes or modifications to your behavior? I'll open it up to whoever would like to tackle that question.
Yeah, I can talk from the Tesla standpoint, and I won't talk about battery performance, just car performance. The tires here was the main thing. Like, it wasn't the car; it's more the tires than anything else. And you know, if you end up getting a rear wheel drive versus an all wheel drive car, I mean, those are going to be the main differentiating factors in the winter. You know, if you bump on some nice snow tires, it's going to make all the difference in the world. But from a pure performance perspective, outside that, you know, it's great.
Okay. Anybody have anything they want to add to that for the winter aspect?
No, so I actually did get stuck in the snow for the first time this year with the Tesla. It does have some pretty nifty features. I mean, it's just basically a car, an electric car. So it does have a stop start. That'll help you kind of bounce your way out of the snow pile if you need to. But other than that, you're pretty much going to dig your way out.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I think that covers that. Can can somebody speak to, maybe we've covered all this already, but how does the performance of your electric vehicle compare to gas vehicles you've owned in the past? So like, what are the side-by-side differences that you want to note? Maybe we've covered them all, but go for it.
I can cite an interesting one that I encountered a few weeks ago. So I have a tow hitch on my current EV. I had a tow hitch on my old ICE cars, and it's a class 2 or class 3, whatever is 3,500 pounds of towing capacity. And I blew the guys away when I pulled up in an EV to tow the stuff I was towing. They were like, really? An EV can do this? And the performance on an EV when towing was actually significantly like better, in my opinion, than an ICE car, because the regenerative braking kicks in a lot more. You feel like you have a lot more control on the road. It handles braking downhill a lot better. So like, if people tow things, it actually, which I do quite frequently, it was a real, like, it was awesome to be able to tow relative to my old gas car.
The surprise. Yeah, that's great. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Adi, Stephen, Greg?
Yeah, one other quick thing. We talked about the performance and most of the other carriers. Something else really important to notice is the batteries are mounted low in every electric car that's out there. The great thing about this is it gives you a great center of gravity for cornering. So pretty much any electric vehicle you're going to drive is going to corner better than their gas counterparts, because that weight's down low where you want it to be. And they just feel fantastic cornering, like hot hatchbacks and stuff to drive. It really makes it enjoyable to get around with. One last quick thing I wanted to say, because I know we're almost out of time too, is I don't want anybody that's listening to get scared and think electric cars are too complicated to own, because the people you're talking to are people who are enthusiastic and want to get the most out of this technology. But for the most part, get in, drive it, plug it in when you can, and enjoy it, and don't obsess over the details of it. You'll want to, probably because you'll be curious to get more out of it, but don't be scared of the technology. It isn't complicated, it's not scary, and it's not hard to use, and bad things aren't going to happen and stuff like that too. So I just don't want people to get scared away, because I've seen that say before. This all sounds way too complicated. My gas car, just go and put gas in it, and that's all the more I do. And your electric car is basically the same deal. You plug it in, you drive it when you need to, you're good to go.
I can echo that, because we have an electric vehicle here, and that's exactly how I use it. I pop on in there and I drive away, and it's fantastic. And you don't need to have any special knowledge or skills really, but like you said, interest probably peaks as you progress through owning or your ownership.
It'll make you curious about it. You want to get more out of it and understand it. It's cool.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They're also really safe. I would hop on that battery comment that you made about batteries being really heavy at the bottom of the car. All EVs, because the battery is like really heavy and low and located real low, they're like impossible to flip. They rate really high in safety, regardless of the brand you purchase. And that's something big to look at.
Yeah, that's great. Adi, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I love the switch, right? I mean, it aligns with the economics, it aligns with my values. And the only thing I miss is the little hum of the car sometimes. I mean, I wish like there could be a little roar, a fake noise, but other than that, it's probably one of the best buying decisions I've done so far.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, it's 8:33, so I think we can probably talk all night, but unfortunately, we are out of time. So I will invite all the panelists, if you have a brief final comment you would like to make, and unfortunately, there are some questions we did not get to. So I apologize to the attendees. There was tons and tons of questions coming in, so we unfortunately couldn't get to all of them. But if any of the panelists have any last minute comments, statements, well wishes they want to make, please do so now.
I have never met anybody that has an electric car that would go back and drive a gas vehicle. It's just so much fun. It's good for the environment. You can feel good about driving. Driving is a joy now, and it's good for the environment.
Yep, great.
Test drive one, you'll love it.
Yeah, I'd say explore the whole thing, right? The financial rebates, everything, every little dollar you can get back, and then figuring out your car. That's just another whole journey. So it's fun.
Yeah.
One thing that wasn't mentioned, it's not really about performance or about electricity, but with the electric car is the simplest piece of machinery in the world. The engine is tiny. It sits right on the wheels of the car. You have so much room in your car. There's no pistons, there's no gears, there's no transmission. The amount of extra room you get in a regular sized car that's an electric car is enormous compared to a gasoline car.
We have
Thanks.
Tom. I will call out Tom, who is our other presenter, who is quite tall, and he rides in our Bolt very comfortably, and he mentions it every time, every time we utilize that car. So, okay, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I do think we need to wrap up. So, many thanks to the panelists who participated tonight. I will follow up with you via email tomorrow. Brian, we do have one more slide, I believe, which we're just going to briefly show. Okay, so resources. These are some resources that you can use to compare vehicles, learn about charging. Green Energy Consumers Alliance has discounts on vehicles at certain dealers in Massachusetts. There's a plethora of resources here for you. This will be sent out to all attendees, or I should say all folks who registered via email. So I'm not going to go through that any further. Next slide, please. Okay, and that is it. That wraps up our evening. Thanks to those who hung in with us late. Again, our panelists, thank you very much. We truly appreciate you. Hopefully next time we do something like this, we can do something in person. In the meantime, be safe, take care, and have a great evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.